Hello. Hello, mein Franz. Welcome to, what is this, third episode of Cult of Color? Now a weekly show. My name is Nomad, aka Joe. I'll be your host for the evening. And tonight is week 2 of Color Grading 101. Tonight we're going to go over some of the software pieces and some of the more fundamentals about the tools. Primarily we're going to go over, obviously, DaVinci Resolve, because that's like, we're like a Resolve shop here, right? So we're also going to hit a little bit of Premiere Pro, for those of you who might Adobe, if that's your thing. We're just going to touch lightly on that because honestly I'm not the best with Adobe, but I can show you some of the equivalents. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail as to what all the bullshit on the color page and Resolve does to kind of give you an idea of how your footage is going to respond when you start messing with it. So, hi. Let's see who we got in the chat here. We got Flyby James. Welcome. Where did everybody go? We got Falcon Rad FPV. Welcome, welcome. We got Bartman Dude, who loves a prompt stream. Well, I appreciate that, bud. I definitely like to be on time. Even so much that I know my intro is 1 minute and 13 seconds long, so I transition into it when there's 1 minute and 13 seconds left to 8 o'clock on the dot. I don't know. Maybe I'm coming in. Yeah, thank you, Bart. It's one of my many AI-generated wallpapers that I've made just to kind of keep things interesting on the old computer. Welcome, Falcon Rad. Glad to have you here. I think that's pretty cool. So let me turn this down just a touch, just a touch. Flexo, what's going on, buddy? Good to see you, man. Thanks for coming in. What's up, fellas? There we go. So yes, like I said, tonight we're going to talk about the main software pieces, parts of the software, and we're also going to talk about a little bit of hardware here. When you want to get serious about color grading, you want to start talking about hardware, but none of what I'm going to talk about is absolutely necessary to do color grading, right? To be a colorist, I think if you want to get hired as a colorist, you have to have some kind of like, you have to have a calibrated monitor. They're pretty inexpensive. You can get a reasonably calibrated monitor, one that comes out of the box with the certification, for just a few $100. So I set my wallpaper when I build a new PC, then never change it again. Good to know, Flexo. Holy hammerdash, that made me orange. So as you can probably tell, so the only light source I have in here are my 2 monitors, my main monitor and my grading monitor, which you guys can't see. But I actually have my grading monitor connected to the normal video outputs on the computer, so I can put all my broadcasting stuff over there. And then I can have Resolve and all the other horse shit over here. I don't have a PowerPoint for you this week because I don't want to bore everybody to death with PowerPoints. We honestly don't have that many bullet things to go over. Most of what we're going to go over today is demonstrable and less conceptual, so PowerPoint will be a little bit superfluous. I don't want to eat up everyone's time. Before we get into that, I have a video I want to show you guys. Let me get this sorted out here. Stop it. We're gonna fade into this, and then so this guy, I stumbled on this in my feed. Really excellent video, excellent color grading, excellent flight, excellent sound design, the whole nine. I believe this is shit. Let me get the link here. FPV Max with 2 X's. Let me copy that link and I will post it in chat. Be sure to go give this guy a follow. Seriously underrated dude. It's criminal how few followers he has. Anyway, this particular video struck me. Everything about it is, for the most part, perfect. The only complaint I had was there's no motion blur. It wasn't using an ND filter and having a static shutter speed. Given everything else being flawless, I can't really ding him on that. So check this out. I mean, come on, right? That shit was legit. He just absolutely nailed it, crushed it. And also flying around all the birds and everything, definitely scared the shit out of me. I don't know if I could do that. Maybe sometimes it happens by accident and turns into a happy accident. I don't know for sure. So yes, that was the one that really impressed me this week. And so make sure you go give him a sub, hit like on his video, tell him Nomad sent you, and start building up this community a little bit more. Oh my God, really? Stop it. Okay. Yeah, isn't that right, Falcon? It was just so well done. The pacing, the music, the sound design, the color grade. It was... Anybody who's seen my rant video that I released yesterday knows, like, the things that I would ding people on if I were super critical, and he nails like every one of them. You know, small details here and there, but it's just I mean, if he's untrained, if he's just doing this stuff like intuitively, he's got a bright future in front of him. So let's go ahead and obviously you guys are aware of DaVinci Resolve. You guys are probably aware of Adobe Premiere, Final Cut Pro. I unfortunately don't have Final Cut Pro, so I can't do any kind of demonstration for that for you. I've never used it. I'm sure I could figure it out, but I don't have a Mac that's worthy of Final Cut Pro, nor do I necessarily want to pay for it. I don't know if there's a free version for Final Cut that like there is for Resolve. Probably not, but I know a lot of Mac guys swear by it. I've seen good results come out of it, just like I've seen some good results come out of Premiere. I guess it's all, you know, as I like to say, you got to piss with the cock you got, right? So if all you have is Premiere and, you know, it's paid for, right? You have all the features, then you may as well see what you can get done with that. But if you want to get super serious into color grading as an art form, Resolve is really where it's at. It's the most powerful platform out there. So we're gonna take a look at Resolve today. We take a look at Premiere, but not Final Cut. One thing I did want to look at here, where'd it go? So we talk about hardware for color grading, and everybody thinks, oftentimes they think about these DaVinci Resolve panels. I mean, they get stupid, right? The advanced panel. And basically this is just a hardware interface for DaVinci Resolve, mostly for the color page, but there's some functions that work on the other pages as well, like the cut page and such. This gives you super fine control. Is it necessary to be a good colorist? Absolutely not. Do I have these? Fuck no. I don't have these. I don't have the space for them on my desk. Two, I don't see the need. I can get by with my mouse or my touchpad. You know, it's just, I don't know. I think a lot of it comes down to, if you have a space that you're going to bring clients into, then you want to have everything look like you really absolutely know what you're doing. So it's kind of like putting on a show, but also you do have much finer grain control with the physical wheels and the ball you know, the big track balls and all the buttons, and you don't have to grab the mouse to create new nodes and all that stuff. So I mean, it's cool. Not necessary though. To do what we want to do, we don't need this stuff. As far as other hardware, so I've got my 50-inch main monitor, and then my 27-inch, I think it's a 27-inch 4K. It's the Asus ProArt HDR monitor. It is really nice, and that is my grading monitor. So the display port is plugged into my graphics card, and the HDMI is plugged into my DaVinci, or my Blackmagic DeckLink monitor 4K. So the biggest reason why, if anybody's ever gone, I mean, if you go on the Resolve forums or the Blackmagic forums and ask about color grading, be prepared to get some heat. Nothing but like high-end perfectionists and elitists there who don't necessarily want to share their knowledge, more want to tell you how wrong you are on the internet. So your mileage might vary, but you don't need to have an external monitor with the Blackmagic card. The reason why I have one, and the reason why I would recommend one if you get serious about color grading and potentially looking at a career as a colorist, or even just a function, like if you also do editing and sound design and such, if one of your functions is color grading, then an external monitor can help a lot, especially when you delve into things like HDR. As good as GPUs are, they do fuck with the color a little bit. If anybody's used DaVinci Resolve on a Mac, you can actually make the viewers in Resolve, the actual windows themselves, HDR, but it's not accurate. It's just more of a reference, kind of a by the way reference. But the GPU will always mess with your colors a little bit, and it won't look exactly the same way. And we're talking like super nitpicky, like actual color values. We're not talking about like, well, this looks pink on my monitor, but I put it on YouTube and it's orange, right? It's not going to be that bad. It's not that big of a difference. You know, it's just one of those things. It makes your life a little bit easier. I felt like I'd been grading for the longest time without a grading monitor, and then as things kind of picked up, it decided it was time to get one, and it changed my life as far as color grading is concerned. So I swear by it. I'm not going to say you won't be successful if you don't have it. That's another one of those things. Plus, I mean, it requires a PCI Express slot in your machine, not a, you know, just a regular 4X. I think is 4 or 8X or something like that. Just a small one for the Blackmagic card. But it's not the cheapest thing in the world. I think the Blackmagic card was $200. The monitor was, I don't remember how much the monitor was, but it's fantastic and I love it, and you can pry that on my dead cold hands. That's really the only two hardware pieces outside of like making sure you have a good GPU so you can play back your footage smoothly. You know, I think any 1080 Ti is good enough for 4K. So anything beyond that should get you through. Some laptop GPUs might get a little hinky because they might thermally throttle when you get the CPU and the GPU going together, because they often share heat sinks. They'll thermal throttle and clock down, and that might cause some playback problems. But for the most part, it should work fine. Obviously, the faster your machine, the faster things are going to go. The easier things will get, the less waiting you have to do. Yeah, so it's kind of common sense, right? If you want a badass editing machine, you know, you got to build or buy a badass editing machine. So enough about hardware. If you have questions, just drop them in the chat. Happy to take a little detour here and answer them. We're going to jump into Resolve. Eventually, should open. Flexo, that's a really good point. And this is what I tell people. I have yet to use the free version of Resolve. My first exposure to it was actually the full version. And I know that the free version doesn't utilize the GPU for a lot of stuff. I think you can still use things like NVENC for encoding, but you don't get a lot of the GPU enabled effects. You don't get denoise, you don't get magic mask. I don't have the whole list in front of me of like everything that's in there, but yeah, it's worth it in my opinion. You pay for it once and it's a lifetime license, and there's no maintenance fees or anything like that. And you know, fun stuff. So I'm going to pop this out. We're going to talk about what all of these things do and how they affect your image. Okay, so we've got this ramp here, this gradient, and I'm going to go ahead and pop this guy out so you can see. On the left side we have the waveform, and on the right side we have the parade. So just for reference, here's a normal image. Okay, so this is the waveform, which is basically all three of these, or all four of these, layered on top of each other. But this way you get to see each of the colors plus the luminance, like we discussed last week. Luminance is brightness, right? And then over here you can kind of see the entire picture. And we'll come back to this clip and mess around with it in a little bit. I gotta actually reset that. I probably need to reset this too, so I was dicking around with it today. But if you look at this grayscale gradient, 0 over here, this bottom corner is like vertically is how bright something is or how intense it is, and horizontally is, well, it's literally where horizontally in the frame that occurs. Okay, so obviously it's a grayscale linear gradient, so the further right you go, the more bright, the more better, the brighter it gets. Okay, and then this, you can sort of see the same thing here. Your luminance curve, your red, green, blue, so on and so forth. So here's the thing. Okay, so we're going to really focus on the waveform. Let me pull this over here like this. Oh my god, it's enormous. Can you guys even see that thing? I gotta make it smaller. There we go. Okay, come on, come on, you can do it. There we go. You guys see that? Okay, so this vertical line right here, okay, so it essentially represents the curve here, right? We want to talk about curves first, and don't worry about the weird toothed histogram in the background. That's not important right now. But we want to talk about curves first, because curves are tied to lift, gamma, and gain. Probably seen these, probably heard of it before. You know, it's one of those things people put on hey Kimmy, one of those things that people put on t-shirts. And yeah, but lift, gamma, and gain are, you could look at it like shadows, midtones, and highlights, but it's not quite, and I'm going to demonstrate why. So this curve right here, because we have this linear gradient, matches what's on our waveform. So if I pull the shadows up, you'll see the shadows go up on that curve, on that waveform. But if you also look, like if I pull the highlights down, it doesn't just affect the highlights. As I'm pulling my white point down, it affects even down here where this line, this point on the curve would be up here. It affects that as well. So it affects your entire image. And if I create a point here, you see it's creating that curve in the waveform. So that waveform is representing what we're seeing here. So back up and down. So it's a pretty much, you know, to give you an idea of how the curves work, anytime you start messing with this, you've got to be gentle with it, because it can get out of control pretty quick. But like, you can crush, you see how it's bringing that bottom there and it's flattening it out. That would be crushing the shadows. And then you can bring the shadows up, and it brings that bottom of that line up. That line is still perfectly straight. So bringing the shadows up still affects the highlights, just not as much as the shadows. So let's take a look at lift, gamma, and gain. Okay, so the lift, right, is the same thing as moving that white point around. If I just move that up a little bit, see how the waveform curve is just sliding up just like it was when I actually moved the curve. And it does affect the entire image. You can see at the very top up here, you can see that being affected by the changes in lift. Okay, I'll reset that, and I'll go to gain. Same thing. We increase the gain, we're going to bring that, we're going to make the overall curve more vertical. We decrease the gain, we're going to make that curve more flat, more horizontal. And of course, like we said before, it affects the entire image. And this is an important consideration to make. Okay, and then gamma would be that curve I showed you before. It's sort of the midtones, but what it doesn't do, it doesn't affect the white point or the black point. Notice they stay exactly where they belong. So that is lift, gamma, and gain. And probably some of you guys have seen the logarithmic wheels, which is shadow, midtone, highlights. Okay, so in this case, like my highlights, if I take the highlights down, it's going to put a bend in that curve. Maybe you can see that bend right there. It doesn't affect the shadows of the midtones. It's just creating that bend. And if I take my midtones down, it's going to create this depression in the curve, but the actual line from the black point to the white point remains consistent. The same thing, the shadows. I bring the shadows up, it's going to create this little joint here. It's called a knee. Okay, so this can create, kind of messing with these separately can create some really odd things, some odd artifacting, so which is probably why a lot of people don't necessarily use it. But yes, and if the offset just moves the whole thing up and down, so it just slides it up and down. Pretty self-explanatory there. It's kind of like, it's kind of nice where you can sort of adjust exposure a little bit here with the offset before you start messing around with the actual toning. But most people will work in lift, gamma, and gain. That's why it's the most popular term, right? So, you know, bringing up the shadows a little bit, pulling down the gamma, raise the gain or lower the gain or what have you. You notice I'm messing with these pretty harshly, but the curve is still relatively straight, right? If I start doing stuff like this, right, it's going to start looking really ridiculous. And in this one is not a good example because this is a generated, it's a generated gradient, so it has infinite like colors in it. But if you start doing something wacky like this with an actual image, it's going to start looking terrible. So probably you'll want to come back and have another look at this particular concept, this lift, gamma, gain, and the offset. And offset in both does, well, slightly different things. So pull this, there we go. There we go. So offset does the same on both. It's linear, so it's just going to take everything, shift it up or shift it down. And also from an interface standpoint, anything that you change, like I just moved this wheel down here. If I double click that, well, nothing happens. If I double, okay, never mind. Never mind. So a lot of the values, like hue, for instance, if you double click it, it resets to whatever the default is. So saturation, you can double click it. So that's lift, gamma, and gain. Let's talk about contrast and what that means. So you've seen contrast, you've seen pivot. So what I'll do, I'm going to increase the contrast and watch what happens to the waveform curve. So the shadows are being depressed and the highlights are being increased, and that is literally what contrast is. Okay, so I'm gonna punch it up a little bit more so you can see that. Now pivot takes this S and just shifts it up and down the curve. That's all that does. So basically it kind of tells, it kind of helps you define where the center of that contrast curve is going to go, whether you're going to add contrast in the highlights or only down in the shadows. So that's how that works, guys. It's a simple concept to understand once you see it. So don't feel bad if you got to go back and like watch again. In practice, it's obviously, it can become a little bit more overwhelming. The next thing I wanted to talk about was color, and it looks a little different here. So if I take my saturation down, you can see all the different colors in the waveform. So this is a 4-color gradient, and it's all mushed together, which is why it looks really strange in the waveform. Reset the saturation to 50. If I increase the saturation, and it just does some weird shit on the waveform. So what is saturation? Saturation is color contrast. It's when you reduce other colors and increase some colors that are antagonistic, and then when you only increase the luminance but you don't increase the saturation, you're increasing synergistic colors at the same time. If you recall from last week, the color wheel, the colors that are across from each other, when you pull one down and push the other one up, you get more saturation in the one that's pulled up. It's a lot more than just increasing one specific color. When you increase saturation, and it'll make more sense when I actually go here. Okay, we've got this thistle, all right? So you can see it's mostly green. You can see on here it's mostly green. Then you look at the waveform, and then it is mostly green. Green is up at the top here. It's up at the top down in the histogram. and generally speaking, all my highest spots and my lowest spots are well within the exposure range. So maybe I might just want to add some contrast and call it a day. But what contrast does, and I'm going to do this to an extreme level. When you increase contrast, it increases saturation. Notice how those colors are starting to spread apart. The further apart those colors get, the more saturation there's going to be. So if I take it to an extreme, super duper extreme, then you just get broken individual colors, RGB and yellow, right, where they overlap. So if you're going to add a bunch of contrast, you might have to come back and pull this saturation. And you see how the saturation pulls the color contrast back down, but not the luminance contrast. Okay, and when I reset everything here, if we just want to increase saturation, we're going to see the colors move apart just the same way we saw everything move apart when I hit the contrast. We're going to see just the red, green, and blue move apart. And that is how that works. But the luminance channel stays the same. So hopefully that's kind of an aha moment. So if you add a bunch of contrast, I'm going to come back here, pull that saturation back down. Most of the time when you're adding contrast, you only want contrast in the luminance channels. Sometimes you can take advantage of the fact that saturation naturally goes up when you add contrast. But most of the time you don't necessarily want it to get too crazy. You know, it can get really ridiculous. You see how it's like flipped. The blue's just coming out of nowhere. So when we do our what I call the 3 slider quick correct, right? It's pivot to 1, shadows to 100. So we're going to raise that bottom, but we put that pivot all the way up so that all we do is push down on the contrast curve. And we just kind of contrast to taste. And that gives us a good blend of saturation and luminance contrast. And I didn't touch lift, gamma, or gain. So this is kind of like the magic thing that, for action cameras especially, this is a really quick color correction to get you, regardless if it's log, if it's, you know, decent-alike or whatever. It works for any type of logarithmic or, you know, standard gamma footage. And you just contrast to taste, right? And it basically just pushes everything down from the top, but it lets it start compressing as it gets to the bottom, which is a little bit different than doing something like this, where it's just going to start crushing it. You can also create contrast by simply pulling down on the lift, pushing up on the gain. So that creates contrast, but in this case we've lost our highlights because they're clipped, and it looks like some of our shadows are clipping as well in the blue. Not necessarily an optimal solution. We can also create that same curve here, right, and mess around with this all day long. So this is Blackmagic raw footage, which is why there's a ton of exposure information in there. So obviously we didn't see the other flowers in there in the background. But it can get out of hand pretty quick when you start messing with the curve, especially when you start getting things like it goes up and then goes back down again. So you see the colors are all like super weird. So this is kind of how you can make really wacky grades. Like you've seen some of my videos where things look like it's an alien planet or something. And this is just me just playing connect the dots and just adding more garbage. And you can have a ton of fun with it. But ultimately, for your standard color grading, right, especially if you come with something that's appropriately exposed from the beginning. So this is what I would consider properly exposed. Like the highlights are just above 0.5%, or half of max, right? Your peak highlights are about 80%, right? So here we could just add a tiny bit of contrast. We could pivot that down a little bit, push the background down, and pull back on the saturation just a little bit. And there's my corrections. Now we still got enough headroom. We can do other things, so we're not close to clipping out. but this looks good, right? White balance aside, this is just all about how the contrast works, how the pivot works, how these guys work. So the pivot, or I'm sorry, the gamma, you could almost look at it like midtones or even just a brightness slider to some degree. Gain will take your highlights up first, leaving your shadows last, and lift will adjust your shadows, taking your midtones and highlights respectively after. So they're different intensities of the same thing. And then when we look at, like for instance here, we're back on our grayscale. If we pull the gamma towards blue, what you're seeing here are different channels, and they're starting to separate, creating saturation, creating color contrast. If I rotate around the color wheel here, you'll see them kind of rotate around the center. Kind of a neat effect. It's like a little animation. So that's all we're doing is creating color contrast. But these are those same gamma curves, right? The white point and black point aren't modified. They're not touched. So the luminance ultimately remains the same. Double click that to reset. We do the same thing with gain. It's going to spread out at the top. And just like with the luminance, the single luminance curve that we were working with before, each color gets pushed up while its complementary color, or its antagonizing color, blue in this case, comes down. So on and so forth. And then you can probably guess what happens when we start messing around with lift. It's going to start fanning out at the bottom. And then if we start adding in other crap and more crap, we can make them cross. And then the offset is just going to mess around with each curve, just like we did before. Remember, it just shifts everything up and down. Well, this is per color. So if you pull it down to green, you're just shifting everything towards green, which means negative pink in some cases and towards green in other cases. Now, negative pink is not really a color, but that's the best I can do right now for you. Any questions so far? I've covered a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time, so if you have questions, now would be a good time to get them in and I can answer them. Happy to go back through. We got plenty of time. Trying not to cough up shards on my pelvis here. So, questions, comments, concerns? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Maybe. I don't know how long the latency is, but just to make sure I'm not leaving everybody behind. Obviously, you can go back and watch this again, which is helpful. Great question, Mr. Skybart. So, they are contrasting colors. So if you look down here on the color wheel, you have red up here, and then right straight across it is cyan. Those are antagonistic colors. If we, I think I still got the PowerPoint. Let me see how the hell to do this. There we go. So what's straight across from red? That's well, it's green, but kind of like blue and orange. Like I think I talked about it. I don't know how many weeks ago, some weeks ago. But if you look at movie posters, blue and orange are, well, they're complementary. But to get more red, or to get more orange, you reduce blue and increase yellow and red. And so that's how the color contrast will work. But like everything is like Christmas is red and green, right? Purple and yellow is like Easter. Blue and orange is like action movies. What else? I mean, orange, red, blue, green. I don't know. Pokemans. So the relationship of the colors is, I mean, you can go back and download this from week 1 if you want. It is like, as far as the color theory and the color wheel that represents is very rudimentary compared to like the full real deal. I have not dropped that one on you guys yet, because even I look at it and go, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Because there's all kinds of different shapes and stuff in there that indicate the relationship of one color to another, to another, to another. And it's one of those things that can get a little out of hand really quick. So I picked one that was very simplified, that showed your primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries. Yeah, that's a really great, that's a really good comment, Flexo. Is I'm going over some of the things you guys have already done. You just didn't know you're doing it, or you didn't necessarily know why you were doing it, right? I think I think today you guys are going to have a lot of aha moments as we go through this. You know, things you've done in the past, you've just kind of wiggled some sliders around until it looked good, and that's how everybody starts. I still do it to some degree, right? That's why I say in my little three slider correction, contrast to taste. Wiggle it around until it looks good. But now we're putting the concepts into practice, right? We're putting names to what you're doing, what you've already been doing. Kind of reverse defining, I guess. So I definitely hope it's useful. So let's go here, and I'm going to make this even smaller. I don't want to put it back down here, because then my big face will be over. Oh, hey, you know what? I need to switch back to this guy. Ta-da! Yeah, Falcon Rat, it's, I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? And eventually you start figuring out what works consistently, and you understand how it works. That's kind of where we're at right now. Okay, so we'll put this guy over here. So we got our little flower, and if I just mess with the offset here, you can see there's quite a bit of exposure information. Like I said, this is raw, so there's a 14 stops or something like that, 16, 15, 28, 29 stops or some shit. There's a lot of extra stuff to play around with. But yeah, I mean, where you kind of mess with this. Not too much to do, but if we like, oh, that's what I want to do. White balance, he says. What exactly is white balance? Well, it is ensuring that objects that are actually white in the real world appear to be white, meaning mathematically RGB equal values appear to be white in your software. But Nomad, why don't my eyes have to adjust for white balance? I don't know. It's something to do with the fact that our eyes have like insane dynamic range and insane color perception, and our brains probably just do it on the fly. It's just one of those things, like you're not really conscious of your nose, even though your nose is in your field of view. So, but cameras are pretty dumb compared to the human eye. So we tend to have to fix white balance or pick white balance. And we're going to approach right now, when I talk about GoPro's native white balance setting, what that means is that its colors are equal, like in this curve right here. This is what the sensitivity on the GoPro would look like on a per color basis in native white balance. Okay, so let's artificially make this warm. Okay, so what happens here is I've got one color that I can't it's so tiny I can't even see it. Can I even, oh, can I, it's not helping. Probably see it over here. Nope, it's gonna be difficult. Okay, anyway, so you got one color that's moving up and is getting clipped. Okay, the luminance value now has a lower maximum than does the other colors that are down here. And over here, the luminance value of this curve has an artificially lower number. So it's going to clip down here and here on these two different colors. So this would be an example of setting like 5500 Kelvin on the GoPro. You are artificially tossing away the highlight information for these two colors, right? Or whatever it is, whatever two colors have to spread apart on those curves and get clipped. Those two colors are losing dynamic range relative to the overall luminance dynamic range. Is it nitpicky to worry about it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not going to make that big of a difference for 99% of people. But if you want to get the most out of your camera, you want to get it as right in camera as you can before you get into Resolve. So you don't want to throw away any information. You want to bring it all back as good as possible. So when you have the native white balance, all three of the primary colors plus luminance have the entire range of values that they can support. They all clip at the same time, both top and bottom. And unfortunately, you know, it looks like effervescent shit stain because it's like super warm, it's, you know, flattened out, but the data is there. And that's what I think scares people the most, is it's pretty ugly coming off the camera. I think a lot of you guys have messed around with native white balance and you're like, whoa, like that. And then a few folks have set it to 5500 Kelvin. That's good enough for, you know, sunlight or whatever. And that's fine, right? If it's easier, by all means, man. Set it to 5500 or 6500 if it's cloudy or something like that. Or not, no, it'd be like 5100 for cloud. I don't know, man. But there are a number of ways of manually getting color balance, not just using the fancy little picker here. Even the gradient's wrong. Look, it corrected it a tiny bit. Little tiny bit. Whatever. But yeah, focusing on something that you know to be actually white or gray in the real world and making sure that is white or gray. Basically, RGB values are equal for that specific color is going to be helpful when you correct white balance. And even cameras that have auto white balance or manually setting the white balance, it might be a little bit off. Like the natural white balance at sunset or sunrise is different than the middle of the day. Even though you have sunlight on your subject all the time, the sun itself shifts colors and you have to compensate for that. So as the sun approaches the horizon, it's going to start shifting towards red because of the pollution and because of how much atmosphere that light actually has to go through. It starts bending and its frequency starts getting lower, so it starts shifting towards red. So that's it. That's what white balance is. It's just, I mean, yeah, it's just picking something that actually is white in the real world and making sure it is actually white mathematically, not perceptively, in your software, which 99.99999% of the times it's also going to be perceptive. But sometimes it'll look a little bit off until you start grading and then you're like, oh, okay, it makes more sense. But it's all about the math. So are you guys ready for me to jump into Premiere? Or do you have any more questions about Resolve? We can always come back to Resolve later on. I'll wait, it's fine. And listen to that super chill music in the background. Do, 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 do. You are cool, Skybart. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump out of this, and then we'll see if I don't blue screen my whole computer by opening Premiere. So, Falcon Rad, I assume you're not using a statically set white balance. You're just using auto white balance, right? Holy shit, that was blinding. Oh, God. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I don't like Premiere. Okay, so it's shifting. So 5,000 is a little bit on the warm side in the sun. And probably what you're seeing, I don't know precisely. Yeah, auto is never a good thing, especially if you're going to do real color grading on it, because there's no way to stabilize the white balance in post unless you constantly have something that is always white, the same intensity of white in every frame, which nobody ever has, unless it's just a static shot. But then if it's a static shot, the white balance shouldn't be changing. So a little bit, if you're using an ND filter, that can have a polarizing effect. But it also, if you recall how the curves spread apart towards the top when we set a white balance, right? When we're not using native white balance, as the intensity of the light gets brighter, the intensity of that white balance shift is going to be greater. Okay, it'll come all the way back down to native when we get close to black. But as we come up, the shift is greater. So as you have, and I know you deal a lot with snow and such, snow is obviously very intense light source. Well, it's a reflective source, obviously, but for the sake of cameras, it's a light source because it's bright as shit. It might be saturating to white, which would be shifting the rest of your colors. It might just be an artifact of that particular camera. I don't know which GoPro or which camera you're using for your flights, but usually overwhelming the sensor can cause some color artifacts. So an ND filter might work if you're not already using one, to try to make sure that you're not overwhelming the sensor. Oh, come on, social. I want to put it up on the screen. There it is. Nope, wrong one. Hi, Bob. Thanks for coming, dude. Does that make any sense, Falcon? I think it's probably an artifact of the camera. It could be something on the lens. It could be if there's any kind of oil or grease on the lens that can cause colors to shift as well, based on the angle that the light comes through it. So that might be an issue. Hey, Marcel, good to see you, buddy. Thanks for stopping in. So here we are in Premiere, doing the thing. We have we got the same setup we had in Resolve, and you can already tell that it's a little bit more rudimentary. You have color wheels in Lumetri. It says shadows, midtones, and highlights, but it is lift, gamma, and gain. So if you watch the curve here, the curve stays straight, and the bottom of it, the black point, lifts up. So that is lift, not shadows. It's not logarithmic. But an interesting thing that Premiere does is it has what's called a soft clip, where it curves that shadow down, and I can show you guys what that looks like in Resolve as well. Resolve has a soft clip feature, but it's not on by default. I don't know how to turn it off. I don't know why anybody would want to turn it off, but it's a nice thing to have if you're going to go ahead and push things straight to black or straight to white. And I think double click resets that. Gamma, or in this case midtones, same thing as gamma. And highlight. Again, there's that soft clip where instead of going straight up, it curves off a little bit, makes that what's called a highlight roll off. You've probably heard that term before. So that's kind of a nice thing to have. And then if we go to basic correction, contrast, there's that contrast again. The thing we don't get, we don't have a pivot for the contrast. We do have exposure, which doesn't do any of that shit. Yeah, and then these are more like, these, to me anyway, to my eye, these are more in line with Photoshop. And believe it or not, you can actually color grade video in Photoshop. I don't know why you'd want to punish yourself like that, it's bad enough doing just photo touch-ups in Photoshop. My wife actually educated me on the glory that is Lightroom, because prior, when I was doing photography, I only used Photoshop. I thought Lightroom was Fisher-Price bullshit, and I was wrong. It wasn't the first time, and I'm sure it'll happen again, but yeah, there is no pivot for the contrast. And I believe if you mouse over the number, you can go beyond the maximum and minimums of the slider itself, but not very far. Like, you can't make that thing just a vertical line like you can in Resolve. But again, why would you need to, right? Okay, double click. And then you have highlights, which if that roll-off curve wasn't there, you'd see it sort of see it's sort of hinging down at the bottom. It's creating almost like a gamma curve, but it's biased towards the top. That's weird. Maybe that's why I'm no good with lumetri. And shadows. So that gamma curve again, that's biased towards the shadows. So basically these two sliders, highlights and shadows, are equivalent to gamma, but with a bias towards highlights or bias towards shadows. And then I have a feeling whites that's just gain. And blacks is more like the shadows. It doesn't affect the highlights as much as the whites affect. You know what, Premiere? Fuck off. Okay? Just fuck you. Yeah. So, here's our 4-color who's a what's it's. You can see it shift as we play with the white balance. So you can see when we push the white balance, and this is how the sensor would, when you're changing the white balance manually to something that's not native to the sensor, you are going to throw away data. So if we have to warm it up on the sensor, we might be peaking on the red channel and lose that headroom, right? Or vice versa. And tint is just the two, the relationship between two other sets of colors. It's just a combination. Same sort of thing. Saturation, color contrast. The scopes look very different here. So weird. I am not a lumetri guy. I have no idea what these lines are about. That doesn't look at all like anything. Exposure is okay. So exposure looks like almost like pivot, but as though the man, I hate Premiere. I really hate Premiere. And I know, like, you can also color grade in Adobe After Effects. It's the same thing. It's lumetri. I think. I don't know, man. I don't know. I feel. Yeah. So, but same basics apply here. If this is what you're using, same basics apply. I've got that same clip. It doesn't look quite pretty because there's, well, it's not resolved. So let's see what auto does. Yeah, it's not too bad. It doesn't necessarily do what you would expect it to do. So we'll pull the contrast. Oh my gosh, really? That's all? Ugh. All right, so there's not a lot of contrast here. Yeah, Flexo. I'm trying to be inclusive, right? And if I had a decent Mac, I would be running Final Cut just so I could show it to you guys. Because this is all about the tools of the trade, right? This is all about the things you can use to start that color grading process. As much shit as I like to talk about the rest of the world, and I'm like, Resolve is the only way, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to be agnostic about it, if you will. I don't have the greatest opportunity to do that just because of what I have on my machine. I've got the Adobe Suite and I've got Resolve. I mean, I could pull up CapCut if you want, but CapCut has even less useful things than this. I would never try to grade anything in CapCut. CapCut is what you use when you just want to throw a LUT on something. Because it's quite fast. But the layout's not fantastic. Yes, so... yeah, fun times. You got creative things here, sharpen, vibrance, and these are all handled as plugins. And well, you got an additional saturation, vibrance, which is a linear color contrast as opposed to logarithmic color contrast. It's just math. You can tint the shadows, you can tint the highlights. So much fun being had by everybody. Yeah, if you want to do Mac things, you got to spend Mac money on Mac hardware. I think you also have to have a Mac attitude. Like, you can't be... I love Macs, but I'm a Windows guy. I'm not going to say Mac is inferior to Windows. I think Mac has its place. It is one of the best user experiences you can have on a computer, period. End of the story. I've just been using Windows since forever, literally, since it's been a thing. So yeah, I mean, I've got a MacBook Pro and it's got Mac OS on it. So it's like, okay, cool. It's neat, you know, but it's like, can I actually get anything done? Sometimes. I prefer, if I'm going to go out of Windows, I want Linux. That's just me. I'm a nerd. All right, let's get out of this horse shit. I'm not going to teach anybody anything with me fumbling around in Premiere. So, you guys got anything cool going on or something? I wish I had a better example for this guy here. I didn't have a good static shot that was fairly stable of a human, so I could show you guys how to deal with skin tones. And the amount of time I had searching my archive of raw files, because GoPro doesn't really count. I had a couple of super shaky shots of me pointing the camera at myself while standing on an outcropping in the Grand Canyon. Looked like I was gonna just dive off. But I decided I looked ridiculous, so I didn't use it. But yeah, so it's trying to think of how we can illustrate some white balance here. Let's grab a different clip. Which one's got 51, 50? Okay, 50's got some shit in there. Okay, so I'm gonna just beep, beep. Okay, so this is that clip of my desert thingy. You guys have seen it about 10,000 times, I'm sure. How do we pull white balance when Joe didn't use a color calibration card when he shot this? He just threw the drone down and went to town haphazardly, not thinking about the headache he's causing for himself in post. How do we pull white balance off of this horse shit? Well, when you learn how clouds work, it can be very helpful. So when we're facing the sun, we don't want to pull white balance off of any of these clouds, right? In your mind, you might think these are white, but these are more towards orange, okay? But if we wait till I flip around, the clouds that are directly being illuminated by the sun, those front faces there, those are generally white, but we don't want something that's so close to being peaked out. So if I go into my color page and I'm looking at these guys up here, right? If I pull my auto white balance, these are very close. So 256 in this case is, or 255 is like peaked. It's clipped. There's no more data. So if we have any of them that are close to that, then it's not going to be a very accurate white. We want something almost more gray. So we might come down here into the gray, where it's about just over 50% intensity. And then I'll pick that. And one of the ways that I check my white balance is I just crank the saturation and I ask myself, does it look ridiculous? No. If it doesn't look ridiculous, then I've probably got it good enough for gamut work. Okay, white balance, when you're dealing with SDR content, white balance is not as crucial as when you're dealing with HDR. And we'll get into HDR way down the road, because I will teach you guys how to grade HDR footage without an HDR monitor, and it's going to blow your minds. But yeah, so SDR footage doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be close enough. HDR, it will absolutely punish you if you get it wrong. So that's why I try to tell people, like, get in the habit of using a color calibration chart, and that'll save you from the headache of having to dick around with it. So yeah, we got that, but let's let me show you a way how to do white balance manually. There's two different ways we can do it. The best one is to come to the qualifier, all right, and I'm going to pick let's pick right on this front edge here that's not too white, not too dark. Boop. Oh, actually I want the curve. I want the curve. So we're going to come to the curve, and I'm just going to click on that color. So you see these three colors here. We're going to unlink them. See if I can pull that out. So we're going to take, our red is our highest color. Okay, so we're going to leave that where it is. So we got green that's just underneath it. We're going to take green, and we're just going to pull it up in a straight line until it matches red on a horizontal line. So you kind of have to imagine these lines. Again, this is not as precise, but this is close. Now blue down here, we're going to pull it straight up as close as we can, sticking to that grid line until we get to same level as the red and the green. We'll leave the luminance one alone, that's fine. And survey says that he's got some white balance. Maybe? What the shit? Oh, damn it. Get that shit out of there. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So that's how you do it manually with the curves. You can do it also with a vector scope. Let me reset everything here. Okay. Vector scope is a little bit more like reading tea leaves. You want to make sure that it's 2x zoom, extends help. And we don't want to combine it. We want that full range. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my temp, and I'm going to wiggle this around until it is as small as it can get. So about right there. And then I'm going to take tint. You see where the center point is? I want to shift this whole thing towards the center point until it is as thin as it can get. There's your white balance. Oh, it also helps if you crank the saturation way up first. That's helpful too. So there's two different ways you can manually pick your white balance. I like to use the picker, especially when I use a color calibration card, because how can you go wrong? Because it's just going to do that for you. Yeah, so white balance is one of those things that it's a necessary evil. I know a lot of folks who will just set it at 5500 and go to town, and that's probably the short of going native color balance. That's like setting it static is way preferential to having it on auto. Different cameras react differently to different changing light situations, how they decide what is and isn't white when they can't necessarily see something that is white. I don't actually know how those algorithms work. What I have done in very difficult situations, I've taken a still frame into Photoshop and used Photoshop auto white balance on it, taken the values and come back and plug those into Resolve. That works unbelievably well. If you want to cheat, because I was just getting so frustrated. I had a shot where I just couldn't pull it normally. There was nothing that I could identify as actually being white. Clouds are kind of a 70% accurate kind of thing. Sometimes, I would say 70% of the time, clouds are going to work well for you. But you want the clouds that are directly lit, so the sun has to be behind you. Especially, well, like anything that's white, you can pull white from anything. So there's something there that's light. I don't remember what that is. License plates are a good one too. And it doesn't have to be like white. It has to be equal values. So gray will also work. Black won't, because that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. There's no value there. So yeah, it doesn't have to be perfectly white. It can be off-white as long as it's not colored one way or the other. Oh fuck. It's like, I think that might be too blue. Yeah, it's a little bit too blue. I don't like that part. But I've used all kinds of things. Like, there was a flight, I was wearing a hat that had white on it, and I was able to pick that out. I used a semi-truck in one of my shots. I use the clouds a lot. I use license plates a lot. Street signs, if there's lettering on street signs, you can use that a lot. You'd be surprised by how many natural things there are that are white, that you remember in your head if you just look around your scene a little bit. Yeah, so, questions. Would we like some questions, kids? Questions. We would like to hear some questions. 3 slider correction. One node. That's all. One node to get to this. You can, in theory, do everything in one node. It's fine. The world's not going to end. Fucking James Cameron's not going to pop out of, or Steven Spielberg is not going to pop out of the fucking woodwork and tell you you're a shitty filmmaker if you just use one node. The only thing you need to remember is everything that happens in each node, so everything that happens in one node is happening in parallel. That's it. It's all non-destructive. It only becomes a static image when you move to the next node. So now the next node is based on what this looked like at the exit of this node. So now if we change anything else, like if we offset, we're going to lose our shadows first because we've discarded that shadow information by adding in contrast in this first node. But you can do everything in a single node if you want to. You can do your white balance, you can do your quick correct. You can even get away with pushing your, let's see, and then you're gonna set there. And you got your orange and teal, one node. I mean, I think a lot of the other YouTuber colorists will like make this really way more complicated than it needs to be for your purposes. It doesn't need to be that difficult at all. You don't have as fine-grained control with just one node, but if you just need to correct, quick correct, quick throw a look on there, right? That orange and teal, which I do quite a bit, and you would just want to be done with it. It's pretty easy. And then what I can do is right-click, grab still, and I'll name this one node. And then I'm going to take it and drag it into my power grades. Now, anytime I just want to use one node, I just drag this or whatever onto my clip, right? So it's like a LUT, except it's not destructive. And then I can just adjust the parameters in the node to taste. It's kind of like I have my base tree, which is this monstrosity right here. So this is how I typically do my grades for my drone stuff. Why do I have this here? I don't know. That's new. But I got my tracker node where I can... And then oh, that's the original. Yeah, shut up. Like, why do we have this here? Added my crap onto the other crap. So redo my white balance. And then I would come back here and I'd fucking track the ground, or track the ground in. Oh shit. Scribble. And then I say, I don't want the sky. And then I hit track. To recognize proper white balance while using one of the scopes. Well, the vector scope is one way you can see it, sort of. You have to wiggle it around in order to figure out where it is. Looking at it, shit, I can't do anything right now, it's tracking. Probably, no, we want to use a waveform. Why is it so dark? Who did this? Somebody messed with my stuff. I don't know. What in the world? I don't know. Is there a way to recognize proper white balance using one of the scopes? Well, if you have something that's tall and white, then you'll see it as tall and white in the waveform. You won't see the color separate on that particular item. Hey Don, good to see you, bud. Because remember, something has a color when the colors begin to separate. When there's color contrast, saturation increases. So in order to recognize something that's white, that's not blown out like the sun is, right? It's not a good example. I don't have a good example for this one. Trying to think. Big and white, if you can see it, if it's like the center of your frame or it's tall, it's like taking up most of the vertical length on the frame, then you'll be able to recognize that in the scope, and you can see that the colors aren't diverging or not diverging a lot, and that's when you know your white balance is good. Again, I think the simpler thing to do, instead of using the scopes, just crank your saturation and see if it looks stupid. That's probably the #1 thing you can do. It's an easy test, and you know, because you'll know it'll look really warm or really ice cold if it's off, right? Especially the green, it'll look green or it'll look pink if it's off. So it's a real quick way to test your white balance just by cranking the saturation. Best thing to do is shoot with your static or native white balance and use a color calibration chart. If you can fill the entire frame with your color calibration chart, you'll be able to see that chart in your waveform. That's why those squares are in this particular order. You'll be able to see them. I like it when people use the T, learnt. I like saying seent. I seent it. So yeah, my grade is obnoxious. It's actually missing a piece here, but whatever. Yeah, I'm very detail oriented, but like I said, you can get a good enough look with a single node. When you start wanting to go beyond good enough and start getting into more intricate looks, then your node tree will start expanding and looking more like what I've got here. Almost every one of my drone shots nowadays, I split the sky and the ground by default. If there's a body of water, then the water gets split from both the sky and the ground, and I grade the water independently. This allows me a lot more flexibility. Which node should I dump my points in? That's hilarious. Looks like a skill tree. I mean, probably the ground one, the ground node, because this is going to be the general part of your look. But white balance is not a bad place to start either. How many points? Where should I dump all my points? I love it. Forgot what I was talking about. Yeah, so you get into more intricate things, and your node tree is going to look, you know, a little bit more adventurous. And the way I was tracking before, by tracking the sky with Magic Track, you can sometimes get away with just selecting the parts that make up the sky, and not in this case because it's too much of the sand, but it looks like I was, yeah, it's too much of the sand. But sometimes you can get away with just selecting the colors that make up the sky that just happen not to be on the ground, and boom, you've got your shit split. So it's going to take time, take some experience, takes a lot of playing around, and that's something I encourage you guys to do. I haven't seen anybody do it yet, other than some folks have tagged me in some videos saying they're working on something or other, but I want to see you guys play. And when you tag me in your videos, you know, ask specific questions if you want. I'm happy to take a look at your stuff. You know, the Discord is there for a reason. You can upload your raw footage, or you can upload your graded footage, and I can take a look at it through the lens of this, of Resolve, right? And kind of, maybe I can do like a screen record or something like that, and as a response, and show you like what I might have done differently, or, you know, so on and so forth. I could share some power grades with you guys if you want to play around with them. Yeah, I think I could do that for you. Like this tree right here, I can share this tree with you guys. I got to figure out how to export it and save it as a file, and then I'll make it available to download. Yes, so, and then, you know, we can start talking about what all these nodes do, especially the difference between layer nodes and parallel nodes. That'll give you something to play around with, and just practice that 3 slider correction. That's usually a really great place to start. Like I said, or just do everything here. Let me just fucking fuck off. Alright, so we'll reset this node grade. There we go. So I'll come over here, pick my white balance. I just wanted to re-illustrate the 3 slider one more time. Okay, so I got my white balance. I'm just gonna go straight over to pivot all the way up to 1. So we're pushing that contrast curve. If there was one, we're pushing up. I guess for you guys it's gonna look like this, right? Maybe I'm pushing it all the way up there. I don't know, man, I just work here. I'm pushing that all the way up to 1. We're gonna pop the shadows up to 100, and then we're just gonna contrast to taste. An instant detail, instant contrast, and no crushing. That is the 3 slider correction. Any other questions while you got me here? I'm starting to peter out a little bit. Talking is so I know there's I went over a shit ton today, so I'll definitely encourage you guys to go through this again. If you'd like, let me know in the comments or in the chat. Would you like to play with this clip here? I'm happy to upload this and let you mess with it. You're welcome to clip it, cut it, and upload it to your own YouTube, and let me see what you did. Happy to let you play with it. Except I'll give you the one right off the GoPro, not the stabilized version, so you can stabilize it yourself like a goddamn adult. Well, I'm glad you got more than enough to contemplate. I mean, I did throw a bunch at you. Shiza. Let me take a real quick look here at what we got coming on next week. Yeah, so next week we're going to talk about project setup. And in that particular case, we're going to be working in Resolve exclusively. So we're going to talk about project setup. We're going to cover importing footage, your basic corrections, and setting the tone for your color grading project. What is the tone? That's more of an artistic input. What it is that you want to get out of it. What kind of a story are you trying to tell with that particular image? Anybody who's done still photography knows you can fully tell a complete story with you know, with a single image. So we're just going to do it at 24 plus frames per second. So if anything occurs to you, feel free to just hit me up in the Discord and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I will go ahead and get this stuff, get this clip uploaded for you and play around with it. It'll have the gyro data embedded in it, so you can stabilize it yourself if you so choose. I would highly recommend it. And yeah, so I'll give one more call for any questions before I dock this showboat here. I hope you guys got something useful out of it. I feel like I was all over the place, but I did have a plan. I've had a plan. I wrote out the full 8 weeks, so just sometimes I don't stick 100% to that plan. Maybe that's why PowerPoints are a good idea, but I think PowerPoints would be boring. Make sure you go give FPV Max link way up there in the chat. Let me see if I can drop his link again. Make sure you go give FPV Max some love. Be sure to like and subscribe all the shit. Go ahead and smash that like button on this video, on this live stream, if you wouldn't mind. I'd greatly appreciate it. Bartman, you're very welcome, my friend. Better than Bardwell. Well, thank you. You're gonna learn something today. Meh. Hey, you're welcome, Falcon. Yeah, so I guess we'll see you next week for part 3 of Color Grading 101. We're gonna get a little bit into the weeds with setting up your project. So I love you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. You're special. Okay, I love you. Bye. Bye.